Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to Beyond the Red Door. This is our second podcast, and the podcasts are coming out of the poems with meditations that we've done at St. Mark's Church in Jackson Heights in New York City, which is to my right. And to my left is Soren Stockman, whose poems and whose life we're going to delve into a little bit in the next 20 to 30 minutes, and I hope that you enjoy it. The Red Door series is something that was created out of the pandemic when I moved to Jackson Heights in New York City to reopen St. Mark's after the rector had tragically died of COVID-19. And the church opened 8 months later. And we started these just reading one poem, 10 minutes of silence, and reading the poem again. And a chance to combine spirituality, religion, and poems and see what would happen when we did this inside of a church setting. It was kind of a crazy idea, but it seems to have taken off and brought a lot of people into the neighborhood, and is now a series that has been adopted by St. John's in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and in a couple of churches in the Northeast, and also the Anglican Cathedral in Vancouver, British Columbia. So, here we are. Shalom.
Shalom.
I'm super excited to really not talk so much about the Red Door series, and certainly not about myself, but about you. And I'm very proud of you, Soren, and your talent and this first book. It's such a beautiful moment when a first book comes into the world and a new voice is on the horizon. And I looked at this book over the years and have really love it and appreciate it. So I want to ask you a few questions about yourself, your life, and then maybe we can read this poem and the Morning in Wyoming poem, and maybe that poem about your brother at the end.
Great.
How does that sound?
That sounds fabulous to me.
So just tell me, us, Jackson Heights, about you.
Gosh, well, thank you for having me, first of all. I'm so thrilled to be speaking with you. I adore you, as you know.
I don't know that.
Let me make it clear. I adore Spencer. I adore you. Spencer has been a great guide and sort of life mentor in a friend way. Not like academic, half-stepping mentor, like real... an example of a life lived within one's passion and language, and I appreciate you very much, and I appreciate what you've done to bring my book into itself, because you were instrumental in that process, as you may recall, but as I will never forget. So I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk about my life and myself. I'm just going to be comfortable with that, because I have to start doing that now. And so to begin, I come from a family of artists, and my mother in particular has the writer's eye. And I think of a writer's eye as the space between your mind and your perception, and how rich that space becomes when infused with your sense of imagination.
Okay, and your mom is?
And my mother is Jane Ann Phillips.
Right.
She's an incredible writer, my favorite writer, personally. She would hate being mentioned. So
really? Oh, sorry, Mom.
Sorry, Mom.
I'm happy to mention your mom, whose books I have read. I guess my question to you, as the child of a novelist, talk about that a little bit. Growing up with a novelist, seeing a writer write, wanting to do that, and also veering towards poetry, which to me is so different from writing a novel.
So different, yeah. Well, I I grew up with writing and the writing life being a normal path, and didn't have to go through a process of normalizing or even accepting my own passion for writing, because a lot of writers do have to do that if it's not something that they're familiar with, if they've not had an example of seeing a writer go about their life and go about their work. Many people have to sort of come to terms with it as something viable. I never have questioned its viability. I've always felt it is incredibly integral to a society, and a lot of that experience and perception of writing as something not only normal but invaluable comes from my the times that I've spent outside of the United States, because the United States has a very different perception of poetry and its role in society than much of the world does. And so there's a kind of very intimate beginning in my home of writing being a part of my life, and then there's a very far-reaching scope in which I've seen it in action.
Was your mom writing like every day? Was it the time set aside for that and the door was closed, or what did it look like?
Yeah, she had a place where she wrote. That was her office, and she would close the door and do her work, and I know that she really felt torn at times, but modeled a commitment to one's passion and an honoring of one's own work by taking that time to herself and to kind of separate herself and isolate time spent with her work writing.
Right. Okay. And writing a fiction is, like, to my mind, so it's so different from poetry writing, because with fiction writing you need, or nonfiction writing, I've done nonfiction writing and gone away to residencies, as have you, where I had an extended length of time to hold in my mind this larger idea, which I guess I think of as fiction or nonfiction, and thinking about like structural elements, which for me are hard to hold in my head with a life that's broken up with a million different things that are going on every day. However, poetry, I'm almost 60 now, and been in the public with writing and poetry for the last, I guess like 20 years, since I was in my 40s.
Right.
So, and I've just continued to work and write poetry whenever I can. Like, it's just sort of, I do it whenever I can, on the fly. I don't go home and close the door and nobody talks to me all day. So, what drew you to poetry? That was the long way to get to that. But so different from what you were seeing. Mm-hmm. I guess I think of it as so different, but maybe it's not.
Sort of. I mean, it is very different to make a poem than it is to make anything else that I've ever made. I've written some prose, but I wouldn't say an incredible amount. But when my mother was writing her fiction, first of all, she began her career as a poet. And her fiction she's always been, a lot of my favorite prose writers are poets who just write prose. But you can see them there's sort of a square peg in a round hole, and that tension I'm often attracted to. So, poets like Dennis Johnson write some of my favorite prose.
Where did it start, I guess, before we lead up to you reading this poem? Like, why poetry? I mean, people have asked me that question, or where did it start? So for me, I was in high school. I had a high school English teacher. I was in love with her, and all that, and being a teenager, and then reading Sylvia Plath, I was just hooked, and I was like, I couldn't get enough of it. Was there a moment like that for you?
There were several, I would say, but I remember very vividly being 11 years old on a school field trip We went into some wooded area, a forest. I don't remember the context of what we were doing or why, but I remember I was 11, and I remember sitting on a rock, and there was no one around me, and I had a notebook in my hands, and I wrote a poem called The Woods, sort of unprompted. It was not something I decided to do. It was sort of a natural extension of my inner life at the time. And it felt resonant to me, even at that young age. I felt like I had stood up within my own life in a way. I felt as though I was more actively participating in my own mind and in my life. I felt that it crossed the bridge between the interior life and world, especially that is so incredibly rich as a child. Mm-hmm. That I found a bridge between my inner life and the life outside of my body, the world outside of my body. I felt that I crossed that plane, and it was not always easy for me to cross that plane when I was a kid. I was very interior sometimes.
Mr. Coconut.
Bless you, Mr. Coconut.
My dog and the love of my life is in the background. It's not a person, it's a dog breathing heavily in honor of poetry. So take me from 11 years old, you're in the woods, and you told me you're 33, the same age as Christ when he died. So that's 22 years.
Yeah.
And I waited, it was like another 10 years for me before a first book came along. So to tell the listener, or if the listener is out there and they want to write a first book of poetry and they're intimidated and they don't feel like they can write it, or it feels like all the contests are rigged and there's no chance to get into them, give inspiration if you can, or hope, or to people that are going to listen to this that are young writers coming up, and what it took for you to get from 11 on the rock in the woods, or watching your mom writing, or knowing that your mom was writing behind a closed door, and wanting to do that, and coming to this moment that we're going to celebrate with you reading 2 or 3 of these poems.
Mm-hmm. I would say it's just the poems come from good time spent with oneself. Real time spent with one's own feelings and thoughts. And that a lot of the frustration I had in trying to get my book published, came from not feeling that the book was completely true to my own life. And it took in the end, it took a lot of reorganization, almost as you would structurally for a fiction work or a book of prose, to make it feel like it was mine again. I sort of circled around. But as far as the practical life,
Did you get a master's degree in poetry?
I did.
Or what did you?
I did. I got a master's.
Did you study it in college?
I studied it wherever I could, whenever I could. But the real breakthrough for me was when I was 17. I was able to participate in a workshop that was full of graduate students and adults in poetry.
Wow.
And I did that in St. Petersburg, Russia. With
nothing's just run-of-the-mill about you, is it, Soren Stockman?
Not much.
Okay.
So that I was there with a program called Summer Literary Seminars.
Oh, okay.
Which I then stayed connected to for many years and ended up coordinating that conference in Vilnius, Lithuania.
Where I ran into you.
Where I ran it. That's right.
Yeah. The land of my people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a huge part of my development as a poet, was
being part of that group or that organization.
Yes. Stepping into a completely new environment in which people had really dedicated themselves to poetry, to writing, to reading. They took it very seriously. They took themselves seriously. They took the conversations seriously that we had. And it just kind of, it was like going from high school to the pros kind of thing.
Who have been your mentors that led up to this book? Were there particular poets that... Who are some of those people?
Absolutely. Yeah, teachers of mine, early teachers that I had in my life when I was, I think just after I went to St. Petersburg, I was able to take a 1-week poetry workshop at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown with
Reece.
Henri Cole.
Oh yeah, he's great.
And he has always been one of my favorite poets.
Was he a good teacher?
He was a very good teacher. He helped me recognize in myself my own sensitivity to language.
Oh.
And I felt a kind of kinship with him, not really knowing him, as a young person
It's like
in his class.
Yeah. Just something occurred to me that I'm contemplating this long book-length lyric essay about why it ties into this whole thing of the Red Door series and Beyond the Red Door, but exploring, most poets that I run across, from Marie Howe on down, Henri Cole.
She's my next mentor, yeah.
Are searching spiritually, religiously, but are abhorrent to being called religious. Spiritual, okay. But I want to really explore this question because I've reviewed about 9 poets for the American Poetry Review, and in every case there was this search for religion and spirituality and a real pushback from organized religion. Why I'm saying this is when you're describing Henri Cole, it's like, to me, the apostolic succession, or when I became a priest and the bishop laid his hands on me, and it's just this sort of, when Henri, with all of his talent and benevolence, does that to you, it's like he's passing on that energy.
That's very much my experience and something I find to be very true.
Did you have to send this book out a lot before it got taken, or how did that go?
No, I sent it out.
Lucky duck?
Well, yes, I was a lucky duck. I continue to be a lucky duck. But I had sent earlier versions of the book out.
Yeah.
To, here, there, everywhere.
Yeah.
But I, at the time, didn't really like the book because it didn't feel like my book. It didn't feel like this is what my time on earth to this point has made of me and what I have made of it. And now the book does. And the version of the book that was taken was reorganized so that it had one section and then a middle section that is composed of a long poem in which I combined several previously distinct poems into one longer piece, and then a final section. So it's sort of a triptych.
Yeah, it is.
And once I found that organization of the book, it was taken pretty quickly after that. But it had been many, many years of not finding that structure. And the book just not really being truly itself. And so in a way, I'm very thankful that it was not taken earlier.
That is a good thing to be thankful for. Let's read some. And let's read 3. I want you to read all 3 of these poems, and maybe I'll interject one question in between. Explain the title of the book, and then just whatever you need to do to set up these 3 poems, and we'll end with that, with your voice, with your poetry, and and hope that this reaches as many people as possible and spreads, as we would say in the church, the good news.
The good news. Well, I would just say
The title.
the title is Elephant.
Yeah.
This this book is forthcoming in September 2022 from Four Way Books.
So that's coming.
That's coming up pretty quick.
Wow.
So
Will it be hardback and paperback? How does that go?
I don't know. I'm not anticipating
What's
a
the
hardback.
cover going to look like?
Oh, the cover's beautiful.
Can you reveal?
I sure can.
What is
One of my very favorite artists, Egon Schiele,
Oh, okay.
has a painting in the public domain and thereby available to me and my lovely little book called Child in a Flower Meadow with Halo, or Child with Halo in a Flower Meadow.
Nice.
One of those two. And it has the kind of simultaneity of opposing forces that I am drawn to. It's it's a figure that is either approaching or retreating, either melting into the ground or rising up out of it. The light is either breaking into day or closing into night, and it's all tinged with this pale, ancient feeling gold, and I just love it.
Great.
So that's going to be the cover image, and the title of the book, Elephant, comes from a number of experiences that I have had that have been integral to my creative life. The foremost of which is my experience as an actor performing the role of John Merrick in the play The Elephant Man by Bernard Pomerantz. And The Elephant Man, the play, is written after the life of a real person, Joseph Merrick, whose documented life was remembered and written by his doctor, Frederick Treves, in a book called The Elephant Man and Other Reminiscences that I believe came out in 1923. And then another few books that were written in the 70s that were a bit more researched. But I, performing the role of John Merrick in the play, The Elephant Man, was something I did when I was in my early 20s and was struggling to connect to my own feelings and my own fears around intimacy, primarily. And what you said earlier about a spiritual journey, a religious journey, for me, a search for intimacy, not necessarily in another person, but within one's life, is a religious and spiritual journey.
Yeah.
When I am looking for tenderness, there is faith that drives that persistence.
Right.
And poetry and performance has always been the manifestation of that faith in my life. And so when I performed the role of the Elephant Man, I was able to care for myself in ways that I struggled to do as a young person. And so he became a kind of flag bearer for my better self, almost, in a strange, surprising way.
It feels like that, having read that poem.
So
Read some of these now. Were you going to say something else about the title?
Yeah, well, the title Elephant comes from The Elephant Man,
Right.
But it also shows up in a number of other poems. And oddly enough, a few people that I have loved in my life have had tattoos of elephants on their bodies. That's just a sort of added bonus. Yeah, I don't know. So the elephants, they arrive, and I welcome them.
Good. Let's welcome some of these poems into the world by having you read them.
My pleasure. So the first poem in the book, in which I'll now read, is called To Be Born. When I was young, I was really an old man. I remember it, delicate and spacious, aware I would become more honest, feel natural, knowing half of love is need. A serious young man, I had trouble saying yes to the bright, clear days. With what pitiful ease we could change our lives out, something else in. But the tissue holds memory we don't quite know. One night, like a boxer dropping his gloves, I answered every question immediately. Slowly, we laughed more. We were hysterical at night, and morning blew the doors open. I ate a radish, never contracted chickenpox. My singing improved, and women never stopped looking. Then my friends began to die. They passed through the beautiful old maples I watched through my window. What a blessing to love the world and then finally be born.
You've memorized it. Oh my God.
I memorized my poems mostly in the process of writing them.
That is unusual, I believe. That's beautiful. And there's sort of like, I'm hearing a little Frank O'Hara, just a little bit. And then it's like an amalgamation of sounds, I guess, and various, I mean, a lot of those lines could be coming from, I mean, like a mosaic, I guess I'm hearing as you read it right now. How lovely to celebrate being born.
Right?
I mean,
how lucky are we?
well, I think you're very prescient, and you're kind of unusually perspicacious. I just used that word recently. It's not a used
I
word.
like that word.
Yeah, well, just like intelligent, but also maybe a little precocious, because this 3P word's unusual that I just used. I think because I'm just really starting to appreciate being born. I think it's come to me a little later, so bravo to you. Now the next one with the title Morning in Wyoming, and I know a poet is talented and good when I want to steal something. And when Soren first showed me this poem title, I had to squelch the impulse to steal that title.
I would be so honored if you stole my title.
I might still do it. I'll let you know.
Oh my goodness.
But read this. And just say just a couple of sentences why Wyoming is, because for me it's a spiritual lightning rod. I've come to know Jackson Hole and other parts of Wyoming later in life.
Yeah.
For me, I really, honestly, it came through Annie Proulx and Brokeback Mountain and seeing that movie, and then I read the short story, then I wrote her a note, and then I went to Wyoming. But I found the place very inspirational and spirit. I see God and eat God and feel God
everywhere there.
In that place.
Everywhere.
I know. Do you the same?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And godliness is so...
There's no other word for it in Wyoming but godliness. Yeah.
When a New York City boy goes and lives beneath a mountain,
Yeah.
it's very awe-inspiring, right?
Yeah.
But when I went to the UCross Foundation in 2012.
Great place.
And that was before I went to graduate school. And that was where I was there for 4 weeks. And I wrote the first poems to appear in this book there. And wrote all of the poems in this fever dream, incredible burst of production. That I've never since replicated, not yet anyways. But I was there for 4 weeks during the month of April. And in Wyoming, during the month of April is when spring happens. So over 4 weeks, I saw this hard, barren, jagged earth become bountiful and open and fragrant and incredibly beautiful, just like you.
Mm-hmm.
And I would wake up every morning so happy because I was so deep in my own heart writing these poems that I had no idea what they would become or where they would lead me to, but they felt so real to me. And that was right after I had read for the first time Jack Gilbert, who is my poet, the poet in my life.
Good. Linda Gregg too.
Woo! Linda Gregg. I used to sit in her kitchen and talk to her about poems.
Oh, well, you're lucky.
I was so lucky. She lived in the East Village. I don't know if she's still there, but
she died.
Oh,
she's not there anymore, but she's with us still through her poems.
She never leaves.
Read us this one,
okay.
And then we'll close with the one and talk the one about your brother, and I'll just ask you a question about siblings, and then we'll close out with that. But read this one for us.
Morning in Wyoming. My whole life, there have been people who have looked at me knowingly. Like the child who knows the hand pointing to the moon, and not the moon itself. The corruption of faith, the downfall we surrender asunder. Each night before sleep, I forgive myself. At the end of each year, I forgive myself that. Death will be gorgeous. There is no love when there is nothing but love.
You memorized that one too. I asked you before we began the podcast, when there is love, what did you say it again?
There is no love when there is nothing but love.
So, in a sentence or two, can you unpack that?
So much of our life is longing and wanting.
Uh-huh.
And in order to want, you have to lack in some way. That's what
probably.
Want means that. There's the want can mean I desire, or want can mean I want for means I lack, right? So part of the glory and grace of being alive is that we churn and grind and become who we want to be and try to cultivate our lives socially, personally, not with what we do, not professionally, but what we do with our lives, what we make. Yeah. And there's faith in that we can make ourselves, that we can change our lives to be what we want them to be.
Yeah.
And there's love in that. Love for oneself, love for life itself, love for being in the company of others. But before and after our lives, there's a great space we don't quite understand, can't foresee. And in that space, we don't have to churn. We don't have to want. We don't have to grind. And when you think about that, yes, it sounds restful, but it makes you realize the great luck and blessing of wanting and lacking, of a scenario that provokes in us faith. It's a great blessing. We're very lucky.
Yeah, we are.
Did that make sense in the answer to your question?
Partially.
That love is the wanting and the lacking.
Mm-hmm. And so when that's there is, what does it say?
There is no love when there is nothing but love. So when there's nothing
but
love,
mm-hmm.
and I am ascribing love to the unknown and
yes.
what we can't see around the corner.
Yeah.
Without the wanting and the lacking with which love manifests in our lives.
You can't have it. It won't be there.
There's nothing to want or lack. It just is.
Okay.
And that's the love that is nothing but love.
Which maybe is what you find in Wyoming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Now the last one. So this poem is, the speaker of the poem is addressing a brother. And I think when I was looking at this manuscript and the various poems addressed to a brother, I guess I was thinking of two modern poets, two modern books. I was thinking of Marie Howe and What the Living Do, which is so much of a embrace of her brother, John, and his early death from AIDS. And the whole book is animated by her gaze as the brother is dying of HIV/AIDS. And also Natalie Diaz had a book called My Brother as an Aztec, who is suffering from drug addiction. And that book also has this power of focusing on a sibling, a brother. And they both stay with me as books, and the power of talking about somebody else other than as a creator, a poet. What happens when I either dedicate a book or a poem or a whole effort to a sibling? I too have a sibling, and I have written about that sibling, and I don't know if that's a question or it's just an observation, or maybe here's the question. In this book, you too, just like Marie Howe and Natalie Diaz, sort of turn. There's this turning to this brother. Is that just in the third triptych section, or just really he appears in the last part of the book, right?
It's heavy. The last part of the book
It's heavy.
Is heavy on family and familial intimacy.
And the brother.
But also the mother, also the father. But it leans much more so in that direction in the final section.
Yeah.
And my brother has been the most important relationship in my life.
Well, this comes across in this book, which I would say probably Marie Howe and Natalie Diaz might say the same thing. So it's very compelling, and I don't know maybe you could just say a couple of thoughts about why your brother is so important to you, and what the significance of having this brother is in relation to your art. And then we'll close with you reading that poem.
Well, my brother is
an actor too.
He's an actor. He's an artist.
Broadway or off Broadway.
Oh, yeah, he's
on.
Watch
there.
out now.
Watch out.
He's everywhere.
But that kind of plays into this book because the whole thing about John Merrick and the speaker of the poems being the actor that portrayed John Merrick, and there's this meditation over acting, the life of the person performing, what's being projected, and then what, so
yeah. Well, I began acting because I grew up watching my brother do it, and he's incredibly talented, and as Spencer mentioned, has performed on the biggest stages.
Really?
And is just an incredibly powerful artist.
What a family. So is he like in movies now?
He just shot a series for Apple TV called We Crashed, about the WeWork debacle.
Oh, okay.
And just rapped. He rapped, literally rapped in a production of Black No More, done by the New Group. That the book and music were written by Black Thought of the hip hop group The Roots, and it includes singing and rapping. And so he rapped and he rapped. He rapped the show and he rapped in the show. But I followed him into performing, and so the experience of performing John Merrick and the Elephant Man was the culmination of his example, leading me to myself. And so much of love and intimacy to me is being known, feeling known.
Right.
This book makes mention of that a few times.
Right.
And there's no one who knows you like your brother. For me, growing up, feeling as though we have the same heart in different circumstances. And
Wow.
knowing what that heart feels, imagining what that heart feels in those circumstances was a huge component of building my own imagination and understanding empathy and bond. But there is a major difference between the brother in my book versus the brother in either Marie or Natalie's book, is that I am so fortunate. I'm the baby brother. So the baby is beloved in a very particular way. And I have looked for myself, for who I am, through the eyes of those who love me most. And so I gaze at my brother in this book, but I also speak through him and look at myself.
That's different. Yeah. That is different, I think, than I guess I'm thinking Marie's, but yes, okay.
But it's a two-way street, very much so. So yeah. I think of him and I honor him, and I honor more challenging moments that we've each had apart and together, and I honor completely incredible, ecstatic moments that we've had, he and I, together and apart. Those are many of the defining moments of my life.
Because two brothers is different from a brother and a sister. Those two books I named are a sister and brother sound.
Yeah.
A sister talking about a brother. And you're a younger brother talking about an older brother, which is kind of a particular dynamic.
Yeah.
And one that I know very well as the older brother who is the younger brother. And I think my strongest emotion if you say my brother and I was going to do one of those psychological things where you have to say, it would be protect, is the immediate word as the older sibling.
Yeah.
Which is probably drove my brother absolutely nuts. But
I have that.
Yeah.
I carry that mantle as well.
I know, it just seems part of the deal. Something about it. I guess if we're lucky as the older brother, we back off and we let go and we just let that little brother fly and be in the background. That's just my experience.
I think that my brother, who is older, and I have 3 brothers too, so I have older brothers as well.
I forgot that. I didn't even know that. Is that from like another? It's all the same marriage?
No, different marriage.
That's
Yeah, they're older than my brother and I, who grew up in the same house.
Right.
But we're all very close, and
but
they're not as creative as my brother and I, who grew up in the same house. But so it's funny to feel cared for as the youngest, but also not just in my family, but across all of my relationships. I always feel like I want to be a caretaker. It's sort of where I find a lot of my purpose in my relationships, and I've learned to sort of turn that back toward myself a bit more, rather than just looking for someone to take care of as a way of trying to take care of myself.
Good move, Soren.
I'm trying. It's a slow grind, but learning how to love myself I am very fortunate to have had the examples of how other people love me. So when it feels foreign or strange, if it ever does, I have all of these. They're like books I can read, you know, just thinking of these relationships and imagining how deeply I'm cared for, and knowing that it's real and true is, again, just lucky. And I feel very blessed for it, but it's practically advantageous in all of these emotional ways too. You know, more so than just a blessing in my life. It's a teacher.
Read this, and we'll close with this. And congratulations on this book coming into the world, and we'll just pray that it will be received and celebrated and feted, and that and that your words will reach many.
That would be nice.
Yeah, they already are.
This poem is called Elephant, My Brother, My Hand. This morning, my brother and I tell each other we are addicts. We are not resentful. We speak openly, briefly, matter of fact. It's not quite true, anyways. He likes to fling himself into things. I prefer to hurl myself out. When he calls me from his bedroom, I know he will want to be touched. On his outstretched arm, his side, one leg crossing on his bed if I come to him, on mine if not. He orders delivery, horse over the phone, chicken lo mein. I sit on my bed and will not leave. We kill for its tusk. We don't want to kill. We tell ourselves. We have not had, nor have we lost, our great chances. We tell ourselves. There is authority within a space too pure for authority. We listen to it, and the words undo, themselves unstitch, don't mean too much. My kin by my side, two wandering kings, too much wandering. The first humans in the first garden had to say at some point, love's debt is to me, eyes caught on whichever heaven they saw beckon like a flare. And in my vision, the smoking gun at the end of my arm is my own hand.
Se acabó.
Mr. Coconut likes when we clap.